On November 29, 1864, a Colorado militia attacked a peaceful Cheyenne and Arapaho encampment at Sand Creek, a betrayal that broke treaties and altered the course of the frontier. This is not just a date on a map, it is a story about promises unkept, frantic politics, and lives forever changed. In the next few minutes we will trace the decisions that led to that attack, listen to eyewitness accounts and official records, and follow the long aftermath of inquiry, denial, and eventual acknowledgement. You'll learn how the clash between local power and national policy produced consequences that echo into our discussions about justice and memory today. If you want clear, respectful explorations of overlooked chapters in history, stick around and consider subscribing for more. Hook, broken treaties, false security, the attack, silence after, investigations, historical impact, legacy. During the 19th century, waves of settlers and soldiers poured into the high plains in search of land, opportunity, and security, and that influx created a powerful, often seductive narrative of expansion that drew people and promises alike deeper into indigenous territories. Treaty councils and peace talks were frequently presented as signs that coexistence might be possible, and those signals of negotiation acted as a hook that encouraged many native families to trust temporary protections. Leaders on both sides used the language of peace in public, but the underlying pressures of migration, resource competition, and local politics made those assurances fragile. Communities responded to what looked like order and protection, and that response had consequences. Treaties made with Cheyenne and Arapaho leaders were often framed as formal agreements that would guarantee land and safe passage, yet the practice of treaty making on the frontier too often ended in broken commitments and unilateral reinterpretations. Federal and territorial authorities renegotiated limits, failed to deliver promised supplies, or ignored tribal understandings of boundaries and seasons. Indigenous negotiators sometimes demonstrated remarkable flexibility and patience, even as their interpretations of terms differed from those enforced by military or settler interests. The pattern of written promises not being matched by actions undermined trust and left native communities exposed. False security grew out of these fractured assurances and from visible symbols meant to communicate safety. Some native leaders sought refuge near forts or under flags displayed to indicate peace. White flags and the raising of the United States flag were among the signals that conveyed hope for protection. Many people made decisions, moving camps, seeking rations, opening themselves to contact, based on those signals. When those symbols failed to guarantee safety, the collapse of assumed protections deepened the sense of betrayal and loss. The attack itself was launched as a military operation against an encampment that had signaled peaceful intentions. Militia forces moved on the village with overwhelming force. Numerous women, children, and elders were among the victims of a sudden assault, and accounts from survivors and eyewitnesses describe chaos, flight, and the destruction of homes and belongings rather than a measured engagement between armed parties. The immediate aftermath left families scattered and trafficking routes for subsistence and shelter disrupted. Silence after the event took several forms: official minimization, delayed reporting, and the social reluctance to reckon openly with what had occurred. Local newspapers and officials sometimes framed the action as a legitimate military necessity, while survivors and displaced people struggled to have their voices heard. As weeks passed, public memory in some quarters hardened into narratives that ignored civilian suffering, and many individuals affected by the attack were left with few avenues for redress. The emotional and cultural toll was compounded by this silence. Investigations eventually followed, prompted by survivors, eyewitnesses, and political opponents who demanded accountability. Congressional and military inquiries collected testimony from soldiers, settlers, and native witnesses, assembling a record that found the attack unjustified and criticized the behavior of commanding officers. Those reports recommended censure and called attention to failures in command and policy, yet legal consequences for the principal organizers were limited by politics and jurisdictional barriers. The investigative record nonetheless preserved testimony that scholars, descendants, and the public later used to understand what had occurred. The historical impact rippled across the region, reshaping relationships between indigenous nations and the expanding American state. The attack hardened resistance among some tribes, prompting reprisals and deepening cycles of violence that altered settlement patterns and military strategy. It also changed how treaties, neutrality, and humanitarian assurances were viewed by indigenous communities. Trust evaporated and long-term diplomatic engagement was strained. For historians and communities interpreting frontier history, the event became a crucial example of how policy, prejudice, and local pressures could produce catastrophic outcomes. Legacy now encompasses memory, commemoration, and ongoing efforts to acknowledge truth and repair harm. Descendant communities and allies have worked persistently to preserve documentary and oral histories, to recover and repatriate items, and to establish memorials and interpretive sites that center Indigenous perspectives. Federal recognition, collaborative memorial planning, and educational initiatives have aimed to confront the past honestly and to teach future generations. The site and the story remain a poignant reminder of the consequences of broken promises, and they continue to shape conversations about justice, remembrance, and reconciliation. To sum up, the Sand Creek Massacre was a tragic breaking of promises on the frontier, an attack in 1864 on a Cheyenne and Arapaho encampment that happened despite assurances and treaties, producing profound loss, official investigations, and long-term consequences for Native communities and American policy. What we looked at today was not just an isolated event but a window into how broken agreements, frontier pressures, and fear shaped a painful chapter of our shared history. This story matters because history echoes into the present. Treaty rights, memory, and the work of remembrance and reconciliation remain alive. If this resonated with you, please consider subscribing and leaving a comment about what you want to learn next. Your questions and perspectives help shape future episodes. In coming videos, we will explore related topics, including further treaty histories, first-person accounts, and resilience among Indigenous communities, and visits to memorial sites to better understand how we remember and learn from the past. Thank you for watching, for reflecting with care, and for joining a conversation that honors those affected and seeks a more honest, informed future.